This week we're going to be talking about mixins. A mixin is a block of code that lets us group together our CSS declarations, and we can reuse this code throughout our site. It's almost like encapsulating the code within a little mini function. Here's an example of some code that will illustrate why we might want to use a mixin. Here I have two classes, btn1 and btn2, and I am declaring different background colors, but then they have a bunch of shared properties that I'm using, and they're exactly the same for both of these items. They both have borders, they both have a font size, and they both have text transform set to uppercase. You can see that I'm repeating these properties within each declaration. Let me show you what a mixin allows us to do. When we use a mixin, we're going to set up by using the @mixin directive, and we'll give the mixin a name. So in this case, I'm calling it btn. I'm passing on all of the shared properties that I want to include within each of my buttons. And then you can see I'm calling the individual classes, and I'm using the @include directive to include the named mixin that we had created in the previous step. I can pass on any additional properties that I might want to. In this case, it's color, and I'll do the same thing for button 2. You can see how this type of workflow allows me to not have to repeat a bunch of the same properties. When my CSS is rendered out, it's going to render out like this, but writing the code is going to be much more concise. Let's look at how we can use a mixin in practice. Here I have a page that's similar to the pages that we've been working on. It's just a basic page. I have a header, an article with some headers and some paragraphs. In addition, I have two buttons, one with a class of btn1 and one with a class of btn2. If you look at the page in the browser, this is what our page currently looks like. You can see how the buttons are not styled at all. In this exercise, I'm using the method of working by breaking my SASS into partials. We discussed this in last week's lectures. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a new partial inside my module directory. I'll go ahead and I'll open the module directory. I'm going to use my @import, and I'm going to import a new partial called buttons. Note that this partial currently doesn't exist, but we will create it shortly. I'm going to create a new file, and we'll go ahead and give this a comment of buttons. And I'm going to save this file. I'm going to save this in my modules directory, and we'll call this _buttons.sass. Now I'm ready to start creating my code. The first thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to create the mixin. So to initiate a mixin, you simply type @mixin. Then you put the name of the mixin, and the name of the mixin can be anything you want it to be. Then I'm going to go ahead and put all of the shared properties that I want my buttons to have. So I'm going to give them a border radius of 1/2 em, a box shadow of 2 pixels, 2 pixels, 4 pixel blur, and I'll set the color to just be a light gray. I'll set the buttons to have a border, a color, padding and margin, font size, and we'll use text transform of uppercase. By itself, this isn't going to do anything to my file. If I save this and we check in the browser, nothing has actually changed. Now that I've created the mixin, I need to incorporate it or use it. So I'm going to go ahead in the same file, and I'm going to make a .btn1, which is going to target my first button. We'll use @include, and we'll call the name of our mixin. In this case, that's simply btn. And then I'm going to set my background color. And I'm using a color in my variable section called ocean blue. Now I'm going to make another rule for btn2, and I'll put similar types of statements here. Now that that's saved, I'm going to go back into the browser. Now initially you might not see the buttons right away. If you don't, you'll need to go into Koala or into your code and force the files to write. Mine came through okay. And you can see that here are my buttons. They are sharing a multitude of shared styles. They just have unique declarations for their colors. And in this way, I'm able to keep my code very concise and apply these styles to both of these elements in the same manner. Now you might be thinking, well, you could just do the same thing by using a button selector and applying all of these. And yes, that's true, but mixins actually allow you to do a lot more, and we'll learn about those shortly. But before we dive into something else, I'm also going to add my hover state. Now again, I want both of my buttons to have a shared hover state. So I'm going to include this inside of my Mixin. I'm going to set the background color to my accent variable, and then I'm going to specify that I want the cursor to be the pointer. I'll save my file, and if we go back into the browser and refresh, you can now see when I hover over that I get the hover state as well as the pointer. In this way, you can really consolidate down your code. Now in this example, I created the Mixin inside of the module directory. This is fine for this particular project, but in some projects you might have Mixins that you want to have be available in a more global location. In that case, you might want to think about making a _mixin.sass file and put it in your global directory, so it's going to be accessible by any of these other SASS files that you might be creating within your project.